The European Union. They use the same currency, mostly. You can move between member states without borders, mostly. And it has its own flag, central bank, and even parliament. But the EU is not a country of its own, and although some Europeans and even some political parties have called for the creation of a United States of Europe, their dream of a united European state is probably never going to happen. And here's why. After World War II, a few European countries started cooperating on coal and steel. By cooperating and pooling these resources together, future conflicts would become less likely, they thought. Over time, this union, the European Economic Community, started to add more countries and cooperate on more things like trade, laws, and a common currency, and over the decades became the European Union we know today. The goal probably never was to create one huge union, but cooperation on all of these issues had proven itself to be quite practical for the relatively small countries of Europe. So why not deepen cooperation among member states until the European Union becomes a single nation? While there are a few exceptions, most countries in Europe speak their own languages and also have their own national and regional cultures. The EU has 24 official languages, and while many Europeans have no issue communicating to each other in English, English proficiency levels vary drastically across member states. Also, generally, Europeans want to keep their language as relevant as possible. Looking at you, friends. But this doesn't have to be a bad thing. The diverse cultures and languages of Europe make each country unique, and almost all Europeans identify with their country and region foremost and not the EU. Except Budapest? Okay, well, things are weird in Hungary. EU member states tend to value their national sovereignty when it comes to issues like taxation, defense, or social welfare. And while all countries inside the Union have given up at least some sovereignty, handing even more of it over to the EU would probably not be a very popular measure. Also, policy areas are very complex and multifaceted across member states, and national governments often have a better understanding of them and can design policies that align with the citizens' interests. EU member states have varying political ideologies, economic systems, and priorities. Reaching consensus on policy is already often quite difficult. Just try to imagine how challenging it would be to achieve agreement among all EU nations on social issues and foreign affairs. Establishing a single currency, the euro, has already posed significant challenges in terms of managing economic stability. Think of the Greek financial crisis, which has fueled Euroscepticism in the last decade. And when you look at economic disparities, the EU is still extremely unequal. In 2019, the GDP per capita of the richest European country, Luxembourg, was just under 115,000 US dollars, while that of the poorest EU country, Bulgaria, was not even $10,000. And while richer EU countries are already supporting efforts to reduce these differences, fully merging countries with such varying economies would require changes that might be really hard to agree on. Federalization of the EU remains a pretty unlikely scenario, at least in the foreseeable future. But that's okay. There's never been a time in history where cooperation between European countries was as vast and extensive as it is now. And there are still a lot of things that don't work well in the EU and definitely need fixing before even thinking about federalization, like the often painfully slow decision-making process or the handling of the migrant crisis. A more likely scenario for the EU's future is enhancing cooperation between nations, increasing the transparency and efficiency of political procedures, and addressing some of the issues that have strained the EU's functionality. Emphasizing practical solutions to shared challenges like climate change or the cost of living crisis, while respecting the autonomy of member states. But what do you think? Will there ever be a United States of Europe? Let me know, and until next time.